Previously on Black Bear Forge. Well, everything's had a chance to cool off, so let's get back to work on our little fireplace shovel here. This fits pretty well, and I don't think there's going to be much work to do in here where this transition is for the shovel to the shovel pan. Mostly what I want to do today is do a little bit of grinding or filing to clean this up, clean this profile up some, clean the ring up because it's got a few little rough spots on it. And then the shovel pan inevitably has some wobble, so I'll clean that up. So today a lot of this is just a grinding process that I'll go through. You could do this with a file, an angle grinder. I'll use a belt grinder because that's what I typically use for something like this. Once I get all that cleaned up, we'll drill holes, we'll assemble the shovel, and then it'll be on to worrying about some wood slabs for the handle. We'll get those epoxied on, get that all finished. So let's head out to the grinding room and let's get busy getting this cleaned up so we can get it assembled. I had those little nicks or creases right up here at the top of this. They are not actually a cold shut at this point. They just are a little unsightly, and because it's a thin area, filing off the material next to it isn't going to make it any weaker. It may make it look a little thinner, but in reality it makes it a little bit stronger because you don't have that beginning of a cold shut or a stress riser there. For a shovel made out of mild steel, it probably doesn't matter, but I think it'll look better if I take a little bit of time to file that. That's really all it takes. I'm going to put a little bevel on here, just for looks. Yes, I am much happier with that. I'm going to take time and just clean some of this up that I ground with a file. I ground this all down to 220, but I'd rather have telltale signs of filing than telltale signs of grinding when I'm all done. And I am putting a bevel on the part of this that will not have the wood slabs next to it. Where I'm going to put the wood, I'm leaving it sharp so I have a nice clean transition from the wood to the iron. And I think the final thing I'd like to do is get in here to this ring and just make sure there's no sharp spots. Which really is pretty good. And somebody's wondering, did I put a touch mark on this? Yes, I did in the last video. It's just one of those things that didn't make the video because the camera wasn't running when I thought it was. So the next thing I want to do is I want to drill 2 holes in here, maybe 3 if it looks better. I'll drill 2 and see what I think. And that'll be for pins to help hold the handle on, and a couple of holes in here for rivets. Then we'll line all that up with the shovel pan, get the shovel pan riveted on, and it will be a functional shovel at that point. I think I'm going to go with the 3. I think that will look better. Move it over a little bit. There we go. I just have this held lightly in the vise. I don't want to clamp it tight enough to crush it. I'll line the shovel pan up. The advantage of these mechanical silver pencils, I can run the lead way out and get it down in that hole. But I don't really want to center punch it up here because I think I'll bend it if I try to drive a center punch like that. But I think I can do it right over this square horn of the anvil here. One of these days, I think I'm going to put a 2-horn anvil in as my main anvil. It's also a good time to make one last check and make sure there's no wrinkles. Looks pretty good, really. The saw blade material is a little bit tougher to drill, but because it's been annealed, it does drill. Let's see what we think about a 3/16 by half rivet here. I think that looks pretty darn good. I'm going to go ahead and rivet that. You'll notice it wants to go tight and not fill in here. Then I'll heat this up and bring that all in and make it fit that pan perfectly. And I hope the shovel pan clears the edge of the anvil. Boy, just barely. Fiddliest part sometimes is trying to get the rivets in. And I don't always worry about a perfect round head rivet. I don't know that it's really necessary most of the time. More a matter of looks than guaranteeing a better hold, but that's all together. Now I'll heat this up and get this all blend here. So just a little bit of heat and a little squeeze down here to bring that together is about all that really needs. And then a little heat down here to get this end to conform. A little bit of a gap will pull together nicely when I rivet it. Monkey tool helps make sure everything's set down tight. That looks pretty darn good. Now, that's not quite the angle I envisioned. I'd like this handle to be up a little bit. So I'm going to put this in the forge so I can bend this up just a hair there. Looks good and straight in that direction though, so I think we're in pretty good shape. Really did not envision this as straight as it's going to end up, but it's not going to hurt anything. I do like the geometry of the shovel a little bit better though. So a bigger up kick here would have been nice, or the shovel blade being flat in the back might have helped. Lots of possibilities. That's a good time to check everything, make sure it's all straight and in line. Make sure the ring is at 90 degrees to the handle, which it looks like it is. I'm going to turn it around, I'm going to heat this up a little bit as well. And then I'm going to wax it, but I'm going to try to avoid getting any wax in the area where I'm going to glue the slabs on. If I do, I'll come back and I'll sand that just to clean the wax off of it and make sure it's not going to affect the epoxy bond. So now it's time to head inside. I'll go to the basement shop to find some wood that looks like it'll complement these. I think I have some 1/4 inch brass rod that I will use for the pins, and we should be able to get some handles on this today. Sometimes before you can get back to the work on the project you wanted to work on, like putting the handle on our shovel, you got to clean up from the project you were working on, which is all this old climbing equipment that I've been trying to find a way to hang on my office wall so I can display it, since I don't really ever go climbing anymore. And a lot of this is way too old anyways. And of course, it always pays to be sure what kind of materials you have available before you drill holes for things like brass pins, because apparently I don't have any 1/4 inch diameter brass rod. All sorts of 1/8 and 3/16 brass rod, just not 1/4 inch. But I've already drilled the holes in this 1/4 inch, so I'm going to adjust my plan a little bit, and I'm just going to use 1/4 inch bolts, which means I can also bolt the slabs on while the epoxy dries, and then trim the bolt head off afterwards. And I think in the long run that's actually going to be easier to do. Now for material, I found a piece of what looks like Osage Orange, and I think we're going to make our handle out of that. I don't do anything real fancy with a handle like this. Most of the work is done after the piece is finished. We'll do the majority of the shaping of the handle after the epoxy is dry, something I used to do when I was making knives. I don't know if people still do it that way all the time or not. But I want to start with just enough material to get the handle out of, so I'll cut that to length. And then we'll just cut it in half, and we should have 2 sides of our handle. Now, 2 rough handle slabs cut. I'm just going to clamp one of these to the side of the shovel handle here. It looks like it's got a little bit of a rock in there, so we may have to do a little sanding in here to make that fit better. Or just sand the fat spot off of here, we'll see. To start with, I just want to clamp this up to the side so I can line up my holes, and I'll drill right through the handle on the shovel so that I can make sure my holes line up. So this is the right side, and that's the front. So this one will be the left side front. This is a pretty crude seeming way to do it, but there's some real precision built into this by the time you're done. So bear with me here. That'll clamp up on the other side, but before I do that, I want to go ahead and trace this, and I'll give it a little bit of a trim. Now I'm going to go ahead and just bolt these together, although I think my bolts are too long for just the wood, so at the very least they'll be line-up pins. And you'll notice right away nothing lines up except the holes. And that's okay at this point, because what we're going to do is we're going to take this to the shop, into the big belt grinder. And you could use an angle grinder, you can do all this with hand tools. But we're going to work the end of this down together so that later we don't have any work to do up against these flats. We'll do the profile, we'll do the outside contours, but the ends will be pretty much completely done. Might need to find some shorter bolts before we're all done, but hopefully that big wad of blue tape will hold all those bolt heads in so they don't fall out while I'm doing some grinding. Let's head back up to the shop. And I'll start with a 60 grit belt to even everything up. 220 belt on the slower grinder so it doesn't scorch the wood. And with that done, it's time to go mix some epoxy. I also took the time to sand where I got some wax on this part of the handle to make sure that the epoxy will bond to that. Worked on this a little bit so this lays flat, so that fits much better than it did. And that fits. Now the rest of this we will do after the glue is dry. So that's the next step, is to mix up some epoxy. Now last time I did this, I ended up with some epoxy that was white. I'm hoping this is not, and I'm not seeing a label on it to tell me what color it is. The fact that the lid is black means I'm thinking it might be black. Nope, it's going to be white again. That's too bad. I usually order translucent. It blends better. This is a good example of why I would like to take a lot more time doing videos and maybe stretch this out over a couple of weeks. That would give me time to order the material I really want instead of making do with the material I have. Both in the epoxy and in the pins, I could have got some brass rod. But as they say, the show must go on. And it's a really big show, or is that a really big shovel? Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Before I get too carried away with that, let's tape off the part of this we don't want epoxy on. You can do some cleanup, but it's easier if you just don't get it on there in the first place. Shrink wrap is pretty good for some of that. Now I want to make sure there's epoxy in the holes. That's what will hold these pins in the long run. The only place you got to make sure you don't get epoxy is on these ends where you've already finished doing all the sanding. Now you could just clamp this up and not worry about the nuts, but since I've got some nuts I can put on here, I won't need clamps. And I'll drop this wrench in a little bit of oil. Oil usually takes fresh epoxy off pretty well. Here where it's squeezed out a little bit right at the end, I don't want that there, so I'm going to clean that up. The stuff on the sides, doesn't matter. We're going to take this back to the grinder when this is dry, clean all that up, and it should be a perfect fit. So we'll pick this up again in just a few seconds for you folks watching the video, but for me it'll be tomorrow morning after the epoxy is time to set up. Seems like we always find ourselves right back here in the blacksmith shop, but this is where we will probably finish working on our handle. Now right now this thing is big and bulky and ugly and it doesn't fit and it would be uncomfortable and it's terrible. So what do? Well, we're going to fix that. And that's one of the beauties of having a big belt grinder in the shop. I used to do this back in the day when I was making knife handles, and it allows you to work the handle right down to the metal. If you need to do a little reshaping of the metal, you do the handle and the metal parts all together. You grind the pins down together. Everything goes together, so it's all one smooth, continuous surface when it's done, no matter how many different layers of material you start with. There are two downsides to doing it this way. One problem is we're going to leave this with a shiny finish where the handle is. We grind this down until we hit the metal, and that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything with this. It's going to patina over the years. But if you don't want that, you're going to have to bolt it all together. You're going to have to grind it, get it all to fit, take it apart, blacken the shovel handle again, then put the grips on, hope they fit exactly the way they did before so that you don't have to do any sanding on them after they're on. Personally, I think that is more likely to not come out quite as exact and precise as you would like it to, because there may be just that teeny tiny bit of slippage when you put everything back together, and a little bit of glue squeeze out still going to have to be dealt with. So I kind of prefer doing it this way. The other problem is the best way to break an epoxy bond, if you want to take something apart that's been epoxied, is with heat. And it is easy to heat up these pins. It is easy to heat up the metal of the shovel handle. And if you get it too hot, the epoxy bond is going to break and things aren't going to be stuck the way you thought they were. So you got to make sure you go slow, keep things cool. Start with a good sharp belt because that's going to grind a lot cooler than an old worn out belt is. And I'm going to start by cutting this down on the bandsaw so that I can get rid of the majority of the bulk with something that doesn't generate anywhere near that much heat. And luckily I was able to get the little bandsaw fixed. I had to take it apart to do some work on it. I had a blade break that apparently was under a fair amount of tension. One of those things that kind of went snap, spring, and startles you a little bit. Didn't go anywhere, wasn't any real safety risk. But after that, when I put a new blade on it, it really sounded terrible. It ground and it crunched and it just didn't sound right. So I had to take it apart and find out what was wrong. I found this little tiny bit of blade that had broken off into a piece and was stuck back behind the drive wheel of the saw. And this is what was causing the problem. I also discovered while doing that it's actually way easier to change the rubber tires if you just take the wheels off than it is to try and put them on there with the wheels on. Seems like a little bit more work than you should have to go through, but it was a lot easier to get the tires on right, and I think the tires will last longer having been done that way than they are when they don't quite fit exactly perfect because you can't see what's going on back inside the saw. Anyways, let's get back to work on the shovel. And that's just a super rough cut to get rid of most of the waste material. This will get cleaned up on the grinder. But you can see the pins are nice and solidly stuck, even if it's thin scrap. Those don't want to fall out. The epoxy does a perfect job of holding everything together. And it really can be just that easy to create a handle that fits the metal pieces nearly perfectly. A little bit better job grinding and flattening the handle on the shovel would result in a little bit better fit. There's a few places where there's a little divot that shows. But for a coal shovel in the shop that's pretty soon going to be all black and grimy anyways, I'm pretty darn happy with it. I think I'm going to explore this technique in a little bit more detail on some future projects. Maybe some shovels to sell, something like that. And on those, I'll probably put a little bit more time and effort into making sure all of this fits just absolutely perfectly. But like I say, this one's going to be in the shop. It's going to be used to shovel coal out of the bucket into the forge. That's its primary purpose, and it's not going to be used for heating parts in the forge anymore. So it should last me the rest of my blacksmithing career, and probably, if somebody takes care of it, it'll last another lifetime after that. So I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button down there. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends. If you'd like to provide financial support, there are links in the video description for both PayPal and Patreon. Those are merely donations. The videos are still available here on YouTube to watch for free. However, if you are a Patreon subscriber at a certain level, you can watch the videos ad-free over on Patreon. So that's just a little perk for the Patreon patrons that are helping make the videos available for everybody else to watch as well. I really do appreciate your support. In the meantime, I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.